On Christmas Eve, I found a note my husband and his child left behind. "We're going to New York. Move out before we get back." It was taped to the fridge, curling at the edges from the heat, written in his hurried block letters. The house smelled like pine and burnt sugar, the last batch of cookies cooling on the counter, my fingerprints still in the dough. Outside, carolers passed, their laughter thin through the glass. Inside, the silence felt deliberate. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock we bought on our first anniversary. My stocking still hung by the fireplace, empty, sagging. His was gone. There was no shouting. No tears. Just the sudden clarity of being erased from my own life. I picked up my phone with steady hands and made one call, the kind you make when you're done asking for permission to exist. I had been his second wife, which in our house quietly meant second priority. He liked to say love wasn't a competition, yet every decision bent toward his comfort and his child's preferences. I learned early how to make myself smaller without being asked. Lowering my voice, adjusting my plans, absorbing the pauses when my opinions landed nowhere. I told myself this was maturity. Marriage, I thought, was compromise. I moved into that house with boxes labeled holiday decor, kitchen, us. Slowly, us dissolved into him and his child. Inside jokes I wasn't part of, trips planned after I'd already taken time off work, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. I became the quiet background, the reliable presence that cooked, cleaned, remembered birthdays, paid half the bills on time. He underestimated me in the way confident men often do. Not with cruelty but with certainty. Certainty that I wouldn't leave. Certainty that I wouldn't challenge him. Certainty that silence meant consent. The disrespect never arrived loudly. It slipped in through pauses, through the way he stopped asking my opinion and started informing me instead. He would glance at his phone while I spoke, nodding without listening, his attention already elsewhere. When I finished, he'd say, "We'll see," in the same tone he used with customer service reps, polite, dismissive, final. His child learned the rhythm quickly. Requests came through him, never to me. My name was skipped at the dinner table, my place settings moved without explanation. Once, during a quiet argument masked as a discussion, he said, "You're overreacting. This is how families work." The word family landed with a careful exclusion. Plans changed without notice. Holidays were revised after I'd already prepared. I'd stand in doorways holding coats no one needed, listening to the click of their shoes as they left ahead of me. When I mentioned it later, he smiled, tired, and said, "You didn't seem that excited anyway." I began to understand the pattern. My presence was useful, but my participation was optional. Each slight was small enough to dismiss, easy to forgive, simple to explain away. That was the brilliance of it. By the time I realized I was being edged out of my own life, the outlines of my absence had already been drawn. The note on the fridge didn't shock me because it was cruel. It shocked me because it was efficient. No argument. No explanation. Just an instruction, written as if I were temporary furniture that needed to be moved before guests arrived. I sat at the kitchen table and read it again, noticing how calm my body felt. That was the moment I understood this wasn't sudden. It was the end of a process I'd been slowly trained to accept. Every ignored comment, every quiet override, every "we decided" instead of "what do you think" had led here. I thought about all the times I'd softened my needs to keep the peace. How often I'd chosen patience over honesty. How he'd mistaken my flexibility for permanence. Enough didn't arrive as anger. It arrived as clarity. I opened my laptop, not to confront him, but to confirm something I'd learned months earlier and never acted on. The paperwork was still there. The dates were clear. The signatures, his included, were valid. When I made the call, my voice didn't shake. I didn't explain the backstory. I just asked the right question and listened carefully to the answer. That was the real turning point, realizing I didn't need to be loud to be final. I just needed to stop protecting someone who had already decided I was disposable. I treated it like a project, not a betrayal. I reviewed documents the way I do at work, methodical, detached, precise. I'd spent years in compliance, the kind of job where details matter and assumptions cost money. He used to joke that I was too careful. That care was about to pay off. The house wasn't just sentimental. It was contractual. I had insisted on reading everything before signing, had asked questions he waved off, had kept copies when he said one set was enough. I checked account histories, timestamps, email confirmations. I made a quiet list: what was joint, what was mine, what required consent, what didn't. I didn't change the locks. Not yet. I forwarded nothing, deleted nothing. Silence works best when it leaves a clean record. The call I made connected me to someone who spoke in neutral language and never once asked how I was feeling. I appreciated that. We discussed procedure, not revenge. Options, not emotions. By the time we hung up, I had a timeline and a legal right to enforce it. Then I packed only what belonged to me: documents, personal items, proof. I left the tree up. Left the lights on. Let the house look exactly as they remembered it. Because the most effective surprises are the ones that wait patiently in plain sight. They came back 3 days later, luggage wheels rattling up the driveway, their voices still carrying the energy of airports and crowds. I watched from the living room window, unseen, as my husband reached for the door and frowned when his key didn't turn. He tried again, slower this time, as if patience might change metal. I opened the door before he knocked. Behind me the house looked the same, tree-lit, gifts still wrapped, nothing disturbed. That was the first thing that unsettled him. The second was the envelope on the entry table, addressed neatly, legally. His name spelled correctly, for once. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't explain. I stepped aside and let him read. The color drained from his face in stages. Confusion, then calculation, then the quiet recognition of someone realizing the ground has already shifted. His child looked between us, suddenly unsure of the story they'd been told. "I thought you said," he started. "I didn't say anything," I replied. That was true. Everything that mattered was already in writing. I picked up my coat and keys, mine exclusively, and paused at the door. He didn't follow. He couldn't. The house was no longer a place he controlled. As I walked past the caroling neighbors and into the cold, I felt something settle inside me. Not triumph. Not bitterness. Just balance, restored without a sound. The fallout didn't explode, it spread. Friends called first, cautiously, as if testing which version of the story was safe to repeat. His family followed, their concern wrapped in politeness, asking questions that answered themselves. No one accused me outright. The documents were too clear for that. Silence, again, did most of the work. He tried to frame it as a misunderstanding, timing, stress, holidays gone wrong. But misunderstandings don't come with sign clauses and advance notice. People noticed that. They also noticed how calm I stayed, how I didn't rush to explain or defend myself. Composure has a way of shifting credibility without asking permission. What surprised me most was how quickly my absence changed the narrative. The house felt different to everyone who entered it. The routines I'd quietly maintained, meals, reminders, order, had been invisible until they stopped. Suddenly, my value was measurable. The real consequence, though, was internal. I realized how much of my self-worth I'd been outsourcing to someone else's approval. Watching it return piece by piece was unsettling and grounding all at once. Why should anyone care about this story? Because it isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when someone assumes your silence means weakness and learns too late that it meant restraint. In the weeks that followed, my life became quieter in a different way. Not the hush of being overlooked, but the calm that comes when nothing is braced against impact. I moved into a smaller place with good light and no echoes of arguments that never finished. I slept through the night. I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. I didn't rebuild myself dramatically. I adjusted. I took up space where I'd been folding myself in. I learned the relief of not translating my needs into something more convenient for someone else. Peace, I discovered, isn't loud or celebratory. It's steady. It's choosing yourself without witnesses. The future no longer feels like something to negotiate. It feels open, unassigned. I'll decorate my own holidays. I'll ask direct questions and accept only direct answers. I'll trust the version of myself that noticed the pattern early and waited until the moment mattered. Sometimes people ask if I miss him. I tell them I miss who I was before I started disappearing. On Christmas Eve, I learned something simple and permanent. You don't need to raise your voice to reclaim your life, just your name, your rights, and your quiet resolve.